Dr. Joy, thank you. Thank you so much for talking about self-care. To me, there's no bigger challenge to us as helpers than the lack of self-care, so please take care of yourselves. I want to thank the Ohio chapter of the NASW for having me this evening. I'm honored and humbled to be in community with you all. Some of the greatest helpers in our profession are here. I say our profession even though I'm not necessarily working as a social worker anymore. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And I also want to thank Region 5 Emerging Leader Bailey Fulweiler for their role in me being here this evening. So first, others have said it, I'll say it again, how weird is it to be here? I almost want to ask you all to get up and arrange it so it looks like you're in little boxes to make it familiar, but I won't do that. Instead, I'm going to comment, wow, you guys all have some great shoes. And lastly, how about this beautiful venue? COSI, amazing. I was just here for the first time a month ago. Yeah, clap it up for COSI, please. I was told by the bartenders this is one of the first times they've done an event out here like this, and so they really didn't know what they were getting themselves into, but it's a success so far. This is great, thank you, COSI. And me, as introduced, I'm Christopher Colon. My pronouns are he, him. I say that because I think it's important that we do that. I'm the Northeast Ohio Regional Director for the Ohio Environmental Council. I'm also the co-director and founder of Thrive Mahoning Valley, a nonprofit that serves immigrants and returning citizens in the Mahoning Valley. And I'm also a proud licensed social worker since 2004. Yeah, I know, I look 21 too. My journey to serve the community in these roles has not been easy. A lot of my friends and I joke a lot about the storms along winding paths, and that's kind of like my journey tonight and how I'm going to talk to you. So you'll see some recurring themes, but the whole point of what I'm going to talk about tonight is to connect you as social workers and me as a social worker to environmental work and environmental justice. I think you'll hear in what I'm talking about this evening why it's so important that we as social workers include environmental justice in our framework. I recently caught an episode of American Song Contest. Anybody seen that show? No? Nobody watches TV anymore, I guess, but I saw it. Michael Bolton was on the show and he sang this song called A Beautiful World. The lawyers at OEC said I'm not allowed to say the lyrics, so I'm not going to say the lyrics, but if anybody's here heard Michael Bolton's song, A Beautiful World, raise your hand, please. Thank you. So the lyrics talk about lessons learned, rising up after times of trouble, and loving unconditionally to make our world a better place. I'm sure these thoughts are familiar to all of you. They're familiar to me because I'm a social worker. We're drawn to this profession for many reasons. We were hurt, burned, we've learned hard lessons. After completing our schooling, many of us found ways into social services and other therapeutic settings. We took the skills we acquired in life and our schooling and poured our hearts into these chosen fields. Whether it's hospitals, nursing homes like me, mental health agencies, children's services, area agencies on aging, wherever. We employed our strength-based, meet our clients where they are framework to engage those in our communities where we lived and worked, right? We strive to help our people in our communities in meeting their goals and improving their overall well-being. That's who we are as social workers, and that's who I am. It's my hope that after tonight's gathering, you all leave here with a new perspective on who you are as social workers, kind of like Dr. Joy said. One that includes environmental justice if it does not already. I think it's important that you all know why I became a social worker and why I do the work I do now. I've only told my story in church before, so please bear with me. It does get a little emotional. However, I did take some of that stuff out, so not to get too emotional tonight, because this is an award ceremony, right? We're celebrating folks. So there is a storm, but I promise there's a rainbow at the end. Bear with me. Since tomorrow is his day, I want to start with my father. He was born with a relatively mild form of cerebral palsy in Manhattan, first generation from Puerto Rico. In his childhood and his teenage years, he struggled to find his way, having cerebral palsy. But in the early 80s, he did. He was a local paper boy, and everybody kind of loved him in his community, in his neighborhood. Started hanging around Youngstown Southside Park. You could often see my dad with his boombox playing Pink Floyd, Rush, Led Zeppelin. My whole family called this place the park. It was just the park. I mean, everybody in their community seems to have the park, right? Well, in that day, I guess Southside Park was the park. Many of my family still talk about it. It's not there anymore. It's also part of the theme of my speech tonight, so bear with me there too. But back in the day, people were swimming, barbecuing, engaging in all sorts of healthy activities. Both sides of my family spent time there. It was only natural then that my mom and dad met. There was a large age difference that probably wouldn't be so kosher these days, but they had a very strong relationship that lasted a few months before my mom got pregnant with me. Now, she was young. My dad was off to Ohio State University right here in Columbus. And after a few months, he left. He left OSU, went off to New Jersey, became addicted to the hard drugs before eventually moving back to Youngstown. That's my dad. I was born December 25th, 1981. My name came from, no, not because it's Christmas Day. My name came from a magazine article about an actor, Christopher Lee. Some of you may know Christopher Lee. Played Dracula back then, but I guess it also helped that it was Christmas Day, so I got that name as well. So, over the first 9 years of my mother's care, I was abused in every way possible. Neglected in ways that I didn't understand until very recently, because I found self-care and I decided to get help. My family did these things to me. Some pretty scary things that continued well into my teenage years. These things caused me to become angry, resentful, and antisocial. Traits that I sometimes fall into to this day. I don't remember spending more than 2 consecutive days with my mom in the first 9 years of my life. I was always with someone else, and they always took advantage of that. My personal place of peace was always the park. And when the park closed, it was Mill Creek Metro Parks. If anyone is familiar with Mill Creek Metro Parks, it's, in my opinion, the greatest park system to ever be. The first one in the state of Ohio, 4,400 square acres of everything you can possibly do. It's quite big for our small community, and for me as a child, it was an enormous place. In fact, I remember getting lost there once. And I don't remember anybody looking for me. I eventually found my way to someone's house. I don't remember who, but my life changed at the age of 9, though. After spending a lot of time in the parks and escaping my reality and the trauma that I experienced, my mom dropped me off with my dad one day. That guy that I didn't know that for 9 years was an addict, and I barely seen at some maybe family events and things like that, but there I was. He had become so addicted at that time that all he had for himself was the clothes that he was wearing and some sports cards from a once vast collection that he'd hoped to pass to me one day. I still have those cards. He was living in a small room, in a house with some family members who enabled his addiction and would give him $5 to get his drugs and make him pay $50 back at the end of the month. So that was that. On the surface, the situation wasn't much better for me, going from my mother's to my father's. However, shortly thereafter, I met the person who changed my life. My abuela, my grandmother, for those of you who don't know what that means, she told me her childhood story. She told me how she suffered trauma and was able to come out of it. She told me how in Puerto Rico, as a child, they were so poor they slept on the dirt, how they walked through the rainforest to get water and seeds, how she would take showers under the waterfalls 3.5 miles away. One of the things that resonated with me is she told me how she would walk along these paths and she would hear the animals and learn the vegetation, and she knew what all the plants did and what all the animals sounds, that she knew them all. To this day, we ask her, my abuela, and we say, what's that animal? And she knows. The church, they're doing a garden. They call her, how do we make the plants grow? So that's what she's known for now. So anyway, it was those things that she told me that resonated with me, and we developed a bond like no other. She took me to church. She put me in Catholic school for a few years before I messed that up. But it was a bond that we developed that opened my eyes to a whole new world, a world of helping people, right? That theme of helping others. And so I took what she taught me, and decided that I was going to run with that. Instead of allowing myself to fall into those things that were holding my family back, and those things that caused trauma in my childhood, I decided that I was going to be different. My grandmother, she raised 7 kids of her own here in Youngstown, Ohio, or there in Youngstown, Ohio. Still lives in the same house. The house burnt down. They rebuilt it right on the spot, one store now, but she refuses to leave. It's her neighborhood, it's her people, and she refuses to leave. Now, my story wasn't easy going at all. I mentioned before there are many storms along that winding path. I got kicked out of more schools than I actually completed a whole year in. I got kicked out of a school my junior year for taking some of my friends over and spray painting our rival school. My senior year, right after Columbine, that was a long time ago, I made some comments that got me kicked out of school. But I persevered. Those were storms. I moved out on my own as a 15-year-old. I worked, I developed friendships, I finished high school. I went on to college, graduated from Youngstown State University, go Penguins. Not too long after, I started working as a social worker. I had a child of my own. I raised him as a single father for 12 of his 16 years because his mother got addicted to drugs. Today, I'm engaged to the most amazing woman I've ever met in my 40 years, and I have a son on the way in August. His name's Levi. I could go on and on about the storms and tell my story more, but we have a time limit tonight. All of these experiences made me who I am today. That person who, like many of you, just wants to help others. I became a social worker because I simply wanted to help those who live in the Mahoning Valley, the community that raised me, to not go through what I did. And for those who did or do go through what I did, I just wanted to help and help them feel love. Love, that feeling, it's hard to come by sometimes, but I have found, in my experience, the place where I found the most love was the outdoors. Nature is my reason for transitioning away from social work into the work that I do now. But is it truly a transition away from social work? I'm here to tell you it's not. The impacts I've had on my life as a child and a teen were invaluable. I hope you heard that in my story. That continued into adulthood and is true today. Nature has true healing effects on us. Before coming to work at the OEC, I spent almost 3 years counseling kids in my local school system. During the pandemic, I was running out of places to have my sessions. The school I was assigned to, like all of it at the time, were all remote. We had some leeway in treatment, including telehealth, but you tell me how you can get a kid to sit there for 53 minutes when they already did it all day at school. After the pandemic went on some time, some places opened. We got some libraries for up to an hour. We got the bowling alley for up to an hour. We got the trampoline park up to 8 people at a time. But then, try taking a kid away from those activities for half of the time that we're going to be there if you just want to do a half an hour session, It wasn't happening. So a lot of my work took me to parks or on walks through neighborhoods, on front porches all over the place. One thing I quickly realized is that there's therapeutic benefits to being outside more so than locked up in an office with someone. I learned together with the kids that being amongst nature has curative effects on mental health and it helps decrease negative outcomes. It wasn't long before I was creating a whole program around nature for my employer. It was then I decided to take a trip out west to research similar programs and explore the benefits of nature in my own life. Spent some time out in Kings Canyon, Red Rock, all over in Nevada and California, Yosemite, Sequoia. I highly recommend the trip. Fairly inexpensive if you're doing it on your own. A great way to connect with nature. Anyway, I came back, I got my program up and running, and decided that it was time for me to take my talents elsewhere. I moved away from counseling kids full-time to advocating for the environment when an opportunity came for me with the Ohio Environmental Council. At the OEC, we work to secure healthy air, land, and water for all those who call Ohio home. I work daily within my region, Northeast Ohio, to build partnerships and educate the community regarding this mission. I serve as a connection between the work that OEC does here in Columbus at the State House and in the federal government at on Capitol Hill, and connect those things to the community where I live in Youngstown. I've been able to bring resources to the community that we haven't seen ever. Each and every day, I bring these skills I've learned as a social worker to what on the surface is a completely disparate field, one that's rapidly growing and one that has a focus I'm seeing for the first time on environmental justice. Truth is, I still get to be a natural helper. That still makes me a social worker. Historically, our focus as social workers has leaned heavily on our social environments. It's looked less on the natural and environmental landscape and the impact that nature has on us, as humans and as communities as a whole. As a result, social work has mostly seemed to leave the work of environmental justice to others. After all, we're doing so much already, especially in the last 2+ years. If we shift our thinking a bit, however, and take the time to examine the connection between our natural environment and our overall well-being, there's a strong case to be made that the environmental justice work that's being done now is more related to our mission as social workers than ever before in our history. While I shared my story on the benefits of interacting with the natural environment in my personal and professional life, I know I'm not alone. I invite you now, raise your hand if you've experienced the healing effects of nature in any way. Finally, I get some hands raised. Thank you. Have you taken a walk through your local park to clear your head? Have you ventured out on the water by kayak or paddleboard to find peace? Have you gone camping to unplug from the world? Have you just went to play a game of basketball with the kids on the street? Whatever you do, the benefits are real. The research is there. Walking in the woods can lower your blood pressure, increase your ability to focus. Merely spending time outside can improve one's problem solving. The mental health benefits are also well researched and implemented. The field of ecotherapy, for example, explores therapeutic value of exposure to nature as an alternative tool for improving mental health. Programs like Fresh Air Fund and Outward Bound provide opportunities for participants to gain skills and experience interacting with nature through immersive programming. Nature's pretty amazing. Many people in our communities, however, lack access to high-quality parks. There's no nearby nature to enjoy or benefit from. The park, like I mentioned, where my parents met, it's not there anymore. It's all a product of the disinvestment in communities like mine. When the steel mills left Youngstown, there was no reason for anyone to invest there anymore. At least that's what they thought. We know as social workers that people from marginalized and underserved communities are disproportionately impacted by many policies. We know that predominantly minority communities have faced disinvestment and cyclical poverty for generations in our country. That is true when it comes to our environment as well. For too many years, polluting industries have set up dirty fossil fuel operations and hazardous dumps in the backyards of these communities like Youngstown. And today, many Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities are experiencing inequitable health burdens as a result of these decisions. Those health burdens are exacerbated by our changing climate. As the climate changes and the oceans warm, it's no longer a question of if the Antarctic ice sheet will melt, but when and how fast. Warmer oceans are strengthening storms like Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. Rising seas are causing more frequent flooding in cities like Boston to Miami, and in my own backyard in Boardman, Ohio. More frequent precipitation causes flooding all over the place. Wildfires out west are threatening the place that saved my life. They're burning hotter and lasting longer into the fall than ever before. These risks and the health impacts of the fossil fuel industry are disproportionately threatening communities of color and communities like the one I live in. It's not pleasant to discuss sometimes, but some do not feel this is even real. Nonetheless, we as social workers have the moral obligation to future generations to challenge our communities to address environmental inequalities as well, and to ensure those most affected are at the table as we work to solve these issues for a healthier community. That's what environmental justice is. The concept of environmental justice isn't new. In my experience, though, as in nearly 15 years as a social worker and the 4 years as an undergrad, I don't remember anyone ever talking about environmental justice. It wasn't discussed very often within the framework of social work, at least where I live. According to Environmental Protection Agency, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. From the social work perspective, environmental justice is one of NASW social justice priorities. The Council on Social Work Education says environmental justice occurs when all people equally experience high levels of environmental protection and no group or community is excluded from the environmental policy decision-making process, nor is affected by a disproportionate impact from environmental hazards. And continues, this includes responsible use of ecological resources, including land, air, water, and food. I know from my work with policy experts and advocates at the Ohio Environmental Council that we cannot secure a healthier environment without focusing on climate change and environmental justice. I know from my work with social workers like you that it takes all of us working together to support a healthier community. So, what should we do? Take a hike? Well, literal sense, yeah. Figuratively, no. You're all aware of the unique skill set that we as social workers possess. Dr. Joy told us about a few of them. I'm going to remind you too. Social workers are strong empathizers, communicators, advocates, and organizers, amongst other things, right? Those skills are critical in not only traditional social work settings, but in almost any setting. And so while we often examine the concept of meet people where they are, how often do we specifically include our ecological or natural environment in meeting them where we are? If we choose to use these skills in the environmental justice realm, think of the power that we could have to shape not only our built environments, but the natural environments as well. For social workers, how exciting is it to think about how we can use these advocacy skills to fight for access to clean drinking water? That's not happening everywhere. Believe it or not, in this day and age, not everyone has clean drinking water. To connect our communities to climate solutions that can offer major new economic opportunities to clean energy and transportation technologies where Ohioans, especially those who have historically been denied access, can reap the benefits. We can use our communication skills to break down what can feel overwhelming and helpless. We can use our social justice lens to examine the need for equality, not only concerning social equality, but natural resource equality as well. Social workers should promote the general welfare of society, from local to global levels, and the development of people, their communities, and their environments. Social workers should advocate for living conditions conducive to the fulfillment of basic human needs and should promote social, economic, political, and cultural values and institutions that are compatible with the realization of social justice. Who knows what that is? Anybody? That's the NASW Code of Ethics regarding social workers' ethical responsibilities to the broader society. It goes on to say that social workers should engage in social and political action that seeks to ensure that all people have equal access to the resources, employment, services, and opportunities they require to meet their basic human needs and develop fully. It's hard to argue that clean air, clean water, and clean land are not part of that tenet. There is a connectedness between our quality of life and our natural environment and our I said that twice. There's a connectedness between our quality of life and the natural environment. The editor didn't catch that. We should work to ensure the best for our clients and our communities, right? I hope that in sharing my story today and my perspective, that I've helped further your understanding of the important intersections of social justice and environmental justice. As social workers, as leaders of our organizations, as human beings in this planet, I challenge you all to keep this perspective in mind as you approach your work. We are uniquely equipped, but we're also, in my opinion, ethically bound to include environmental justice in our practice and framework, even if it means expanding our purview of what it means to be social workers. I'll close by referencing that song again and inviting you all to use the lessons we've learned to make this a beautiful world. Thank you.